The following production is presented by League Info Site and the Credit Union Broadcast Experience, QTV.
Thank you for joining me at the CU Compliance Connection from InfoSite on CubeTV. I'm Sean Wolbert. This presentation will review new NCUA requirements for federally insured credit unions over $10 billion in assets to develop and maintain capital plans and conduct annual stress tests. The ultimate responsibility for governance over a covered credit union's capital planning and analysis process rests with the credit union's board of directors. The credit union's board of directors must at least annually and prior to submission of a capital plan review the credit union's process for assessing capital adequacy, ensure that any deficiencies in the credit union's process for assessing capital adequacy are appropriately remedied, and approve the credit union's capital plan. Senior management responsible for capital planning and analysis must provide regular reports on capital planning and analysis to the credit union's board of directors. The capital policy must state goals and limits for capital levels and risk exposure, establish requirements for reviewing and reporting capital levels and breaches of capital levels with contingency plans for remedying any breaches. State the governance over the capital analysis process, including all activities that contribute to the analysis. Specify capital analysis roles and responsibilities, including controls over external resources used for any part of the capital analysis, such as vendors and data providers. Specify the internal controls that govern capital planning, including review by internal audit, control of changes in capital planning procedures, and required documentation. Describe the frequency with which capital analysis will be conducted. State how the capital analysis results are used and by whom, and be reviewed at least annually and updated as necessary to ensure that it remains current with changes in market condition, credit union products and strategies, credit union risk exposures and activities, and the credit union's established risk appetite and industry practices. The credit union must develop and maintain a capital plan and submit this plan to the NCUA each year by February 28th. The plan must be based on the credit union's financial data as of September 30th of the immediately preceding previous calendar year. The NCUA will assess whether the capital planning and analysis process is sufficient and robust in determining whether to accept the credit union's capital plan. The capital plan must also contain a quarterly assessment of the expected sources and levels of stress test capital over the planning horizon that reflects the covered credit union's financial state, size, complexity, risk profile, scope of operations, and the existing level of capital, assuming both expected and unfavorable conditions arise. A discussion of how the credit union will, under expected and unfavorable conditions, maintain stress test capital commensurate with all of its risks, including reputational, strategic, legal, and compliance risks. Include a discussion of how the credit union will, under expected and unfavorable conditions, maintain ready access to funding, meet its obligations to all creditors and other counterparties, and continue to serve as an intermediary for its members. If the credit union conducts its own stress test, a discussion of how the credit union will maintain a stress test capital ratio of 5% or more under baseline adverse and severely adverse conditions in each quarter of the 9-quarter horizon that's upcoming, and a discussion of any expected changes to the credit union's business plan that are likely to have a material impact on the credit union's capital adequacy and liquidity. And finally, a program to conduct sensitivity testing, reverse stress testing, and an analysis of the impact of the credit risk and interest rate risk to capital under unfavorable economic conditions. The NCUA will conduct stress tests of the credit union, which will consist of baseline, adverse, and severely adverse scenarios. The NCUA will provide the scenarios for testing by December 1st of a calendar year, and the tests will be based on the credit union's financial data as of September 30th of that year. The test will take into account all relevant exposures and activities of a credit union to evaluate its ability to absorb losses in specified scenarios over that 9-quarter horizon, and minimum stress test capital ratio must be 5%. This ruling only applies to federally insured credit unions over $10 billion in assets. Those credit unions will need to carefully review the requirements and the implications of the consequences of the NCUA requirements. The ruling was effective on May 30th of this year, 2014. Thank you for joining me at the CU Compliance Connection by InfoSight, only on Cube TV.
Thanks for watching the #1 compliance program for the credit union community. Stay tuned.